Hello world, my name is Ben. This is AnyLogic 101, a video series where I explain quick tips and tricks about AnyLogic that I learned over many years. Today I want to talk about parameters, hopefully something that you've used, hopefully that is something that you understand in basic terms. What I want to talk about is the different types of parameters you can have and why you would use the different types. So let's dive in, because let's look at a specific agent. Typically, let me start with something I don't want to show. Typically what you do is you have a model, you have some agent type, you go into the agent palette and you create a parameter, drag it in to specify a characteristic of that agent. And what I typically tell my students is you use that if it's something that does not change over the course of the model. So it's a characteristic of yourself. And that's 90% of the use case. So in my example model, I've done that. I've dragged in a parameter pMyName, which specifies the name of that agent. It's just a string. And I've instantiated an instance of my agent on main. If I click on it, you can see there is now this entry, what's the name of this agent, and it's myself, so it's called Ben. So if I run the model, we have one agent instantiated, and the pMyName is equal to Ben. If we click into him, we see his name is Ben. So again, that's 90% of the use case typically for normal models of using parameters. Super useful, very good for experiments and all that kind of stuff. However, there is two more ways to use parameters, and they're a little more obscure, so I want to focus on those. One is this one, which I named pMyStatus, and the difference here is under advanced, I switched the type of the parameter. The parameters I've spoken so far about are static parameters, meaning they are not supposed to change. You can change them during runtime. They are typically not supposed to be changed. However, there is also the dynamic parameter. And this one is interesting because you also specify a data type. In this case, I'm saying it should also be a string. But you can actually, it doesn't have a fixed value. It's actually evaluated continuously at runtime when you need it. So what does that mean? Let's have a look at this little variable, my age. So that's the age of my agent. Initially it's 0. And what I'm saying here is, well, if I want to know my status, pMyStatus, what it should give me is a string, and I'm saying if vMyAge is below 3, it should be toddler. Otherwise, if it's below 6, it should be kid. Otherwise, below 18, teen. Otherwise, adult. So what I can do now is when I run the model, and I click this little button. Let's ignore this for now. I'm trace lining the pMyStatus. Let's actually do that live. So I click get order. Let's look into the console. And because initially my agent's age is 0, the console throws toddler, which is exactly what I would expect because it's below 3. So that's good. Now, let's look into the details of this. First of all, note that there are 2 brackets behind pMyStatus, meaning the parameter has actually become a function. It's dynamically evaluated, meaning the agent doesn't know its status unless you call this function. And then it checks, well, what is my status? What's my current age? And what should I return as a string, toddler, kid, teen, or adult. So it is like a function. I could also have written a function fGetMyStatus and return a string based on vMyAge. So why are you using this then? Well, the reason is that now if you click on the instance, you see the second line here asking for the pMyStatus, for the status. And now you can see what I've given as the default function setup, but I could actually create another agent, agent 1, give it a different name, someone, and actually change the status definition. So I could say for this guy, everything under 2 is a toddler, and then 2 to 6 is a kid, or 2 to 8. So I can easily change the setup of my dynamic parameter and define different characteristics. I don't need to write an elaborate function, fGetMyStatus, that sometimes uses this setup and sometimes uses that setup. So this can be useful in various cases. So just think about that and remember that you can define that dynamically here. All right, so let's look at the third parameter type. Visually, also notice the difference between the first one that we spoke about, the static one, and the dynamic one. They look kind of slightly different. The wedge is not colored. Let's look at the third type, which is an action parameter. Now, this one is again like a function, but a function that executes code. This is a function that simply returns something. This is a function that actually executes some code. So in the default action code, I'm saying when this parameter is executed or called, just put 1 onto the vMyAge, so age by 1 year essentially. But I could write much more code here. So I can write as much code, it can be as complex as you want, whatever you like. So let's go back to the agent instance. Let's get rid of this guy. And you see in the properties of this instance, we also have this line for the pH 1 year, for our action parameter. And again, it's picking up the default code that I've set, but I could write more code here as well. This is for Ben. Now, the way to use this code is like in this line that I've commented out previously. So I've created a little button, and if I click it, I want to get my agent to age 1 year. So I'm calling the action parameter like a function. And if we execute it, let's see, some coding error there. So if we execute it, let's look into the console. It should, well, it does execute the code that I've written here. It will age my agent by 1 year. And it will also trace line now the pMyStatus again. So I'm still a toddler, now I'm a kid because I've turned 3, and then I'm a kid for a couple of years, then I'm a teen for a couple of years, until I become an adult. So the action parameter is like a function that executes code. And again, the question is, why would you not just use a function? And the reason again is that if we have another instance of my agent, we could now easily change what this action parameter should do. So we could actually say, well, my agent 1 should actually age twice as fast. So let's put it like that. So every time I click a button, every time I call pH 1 year, for my agent 1, he or she will age not 1 year, but 2 years now. So you obviously have to be careful with the labeling here, but you could also add some additional code that is different from this instance. So let's summarize. We have seen that you can use a parameter in 3 different ways. Typically 90% of the cases you just keep the static parameter that you get by default, use it to characterize your agents when they're not typically changing during the runtime. Fine. We have dynamic parameters that allow you to set to return a specific value depending on some conditions. So it's like a function, but it only returns a value. So it doesn't execute code, it just returns a value depending on some conditions. And then the third type is the action parameter that is like a function actually executing code for you. And you use the latter two, dynamic and action parameters, typically, if you instantiate different kinds of agents, they have the same capabilities, like getting a status, like actually aging, but each different instance implements it slightly differently. Also, the latter two you use a lot when you develop a library, but that's a different topic. So I hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot for watching.